Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today I have a special guest. Brian Bogert is a passionate human behavior and performance coach, speaker, business strategist, top sales professional, philanthropic leader who believes in helping growth-minded individuals make their best even better. Welcome, Brian. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Sorry for the mouthful of the intro. It's time to simplify that thing. It's a little crazy. So I'm so excited to be here with both of you. It's going to be a fun chat today.
Oh, yeah, I'm super excited too for this conversation. So let's just dive in and go into you telling us a little about your story and what led you to doing what you're doing right now.
Perfect. So I'm going to actually ask both of you and whoever's listening right now, unless they're driving, to just close your eyes for 1 second.
Okay.
I promise you I'll tell you when to reopen, but just bear with me, please.
Okay, sure.
I want you to imagine going to a store, having a successful shopping trip, heading on with your day, knowing it's going to be a beautiful one. You walk outside, you look up, you feel the warmth of the sun on your skin, you feel the breeze in your hair, and you are just got a little pep in your step, heading to the car. And as you're fumbling for your keys to unlock and get in, you turn your head and you see a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. Go ahead and open your eyes. Wow. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back to our car, anybody who's known me for more than 30 seconds now, I have an excitement and energy for life, and I wanted to get home and put that paintbrush to use. So I was the first one in the car. My mom and brother were a few feet behind, and as I waited for them to catch up, see, this was back in the days before there was key fobs. So I had to wait for my mom to literally catch up and put the key in the door. As I was waiting, a truck pulls up in front of the store, and a driver and middle passenger get out. Passenger all the way to the right feels the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, scooted over his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up on the steering wheel, up on the dashboard, and before you know it, he was catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us with no time to react. We were in an end spot. He went up and over the median, went up and over the tree, hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body.
Whoa.
So there I was laying on the parking lot on a 115-degree day in Phoenix, Arizona. My mom and brother watched the whole thing happen. They look up and they see my arm laying on the pavement 10 feet away. Fortunately for me, so did my guardian angel. There was a nurse that walked out of the store right when this took place, and she saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her, and I'm forever indebted to her for choosing to lean in and taking action versus going on with her day. She came over and immediately stopped the bleeding on the main wound and saved my life. And she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, fill it with ice, and get my detached arm on ice within minutes to give me a fighting chance of having a reattached limb. Truth is, had it not been for that woman, I either wouldn't be here with you today or I'd be here with a cleaned up stump. That's just the reality. So I know that a lot of the audience probably wasn't expecting it to go there today, right? I have a very, very unique story. But what I've realized in all my time of doing this is that we all have unique stories. So what's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories, and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. So I'm going to share with you 2 primary lessons, and it's going to lead us right into what I'm doing today. And then we'll take the conversation wherever we need to go. The first is I learned not to get stuck by what has happened to me, but instead get moved by what I can do with it. And the second, I didn't learn until far later. You see, at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, although I was the one having surgeries, although I was the one having to go to physical and occupational therapy, I was also being guided through the process. So I was a little bit in a fog. My parents, however, were not in a fog. They were intimately aware of the unceasing medical treatments and years of therapy. And the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great potential suffering for them. So they willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, to do what was tough, to embrace the pains required to ultimately strengthen and heal me. So whether intentional or not, what they did was ingrain in me a philosophy and a way of living, which was to embrace pain, to avoid suffering. And I believe that when this is done correctly, that's also where we gain freedom. So it's these 2 lessons, along with others, that I used to not only overcome this unique injury, but how my business partners and I scaled our last business to over 15 million with the span of a decade. And how now I'm flipping it on its head with our teams to really focus on human behavior and performance to help individuals and organizations just like you, just like the people listening, become more aware, more intentional, and who they already are, their most authentic selves. You see, I believe that's when the door starts to crack to perspective, motivation, and direction, and when joy, freedom, and fulfillment can start entering into our lives holistically, which is why all of our entities are on a mission to impact 1 billion lives by 2045. Because I believe that if we can reduce the level of suffering on this planet, even just a little bit, it gives people the opportunity to experience joy, freedom, and fulfillment. That's where vulnerability and authenticity, which are the glue that binds human connection, start to come back into the forefront. And that's when we start seeing people be able to stand on their own 2 feet, not only confident, but convicted in who they are, knowing that the world won't just accept them, but will embrace them for exactly who they are. And I believe that if we can accomplish these things in the next 24 years, that it's going to leave a lot better world for my kids and my grandkids.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a ton of different angles that we could go from there, a lot of different things that we could unpack. I think maybe the first string I want to pull out a little bit is sort of this idea that you mentioned of embracing pain and leaning into that instead of trying to avoid it, because, I've got to imagine that's not the default for a lot of people. So maybe you could paint a picture of sort of what the typical path looks like, and then what you think people can do a little bit differently and what that opens up for them.
Yeah, so I think the typical path is pretty obvious, in that we all kind of try to tend to avoid pain, right? Like, let's just call it what it is. We like instant gratification. We want to numb in areas that we can. We want to feel great. We don't want to defer, right? And it's just how we typically live our lives. It's easier to just focus on what we want right now than focus on who we want to become and where we want to go and who we want to impact. And the world literally has narratives. I mean, the world tells us to reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain. I mean, think about it. We have ads and billboards, you call it, drugs, prescription, alcohol, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, we want to avoid pain at all costs. We numb by watching TV. We numb by doing different things. And oh, by the way, this is a natural evolutionary response for survival. If you cut your leg 100 years ago, you could die. But that's not the reality anymore. So let's just start by understanding pain, and let's start by understanding suffering, because then this concept will make sense. Mm-hmm. Pain is defined as short-term, intermittent, a direct cause from something, and alleviated once that direct cause is removed. And then we as human beings go ahead and screw it up by adding adjectives in front of it, like we do with many other things, and we start saying acute pain and chronic pain. Mm-hmm. Acute maintains the definition, but chronic inherently changes it, because it implies that it's no longer short-term and it persists after the direct cause is removed. So let's stop calling that chronic pain and call it what it actually is: suffering. Mm-hmm. Now, pain gets lots of attention because we feel it, it's real, it's right in front of us, and none of us like pain. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about pain is that drawing any kind of definitive conclusions about it is very difficult, because it can't be measured independent of the person experiencing it. Mm-hmm. Other than one thing: we all experience pain. Now, suffering, on the other hand, we don't want to admit exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices. Because see, with suffering, the effects of it start to creep up on us, sometimes until it's irreversible. It can no longer be reversed. So let's understand this concept in application for a second, right? We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the aches and pains and suffering from a sedentary lifestyle. Mm-hmm. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid a loveless marriage and the suffering that goes along with being stuck in a marriage when you actually want divorce, or being stuck in a marriage when you want repair. We can embrace the pain of having our kids put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation we'll never get back. As business owners and leaders, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson, contributing the most to top line growth, to avoid the suffering of stagnant growth and losing all our other top talent because they were the greatest cancer in our culture. And the list goes on. It doesn't matter what area of life this happens. It's about really being able to acknowledge the suffering you wish to avoid, identify the pains you choose to avoid, and then establishing that a habit in all areas of our life so that we can technically understand it's not about putting ourselves into unnecessary amounts of pain or to put ourselves in pain's sake, but to identify the proper pains between where we are today and our true potential, and learning those to be an actual pathway to our success. You see, the unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance. So until we accept the current state of things, we cannot alter them. We have to move through this from a place of awareness, because I believe that we all must choose our pain or our suffering will choose us.
Love it. Yes. I love your passion and excitement for this topic. It just is radiating through. And I really resonate because this falls in line with some Buddhist principles of like accepting your reality, because when you resist it, it persists. That's and right. My question and my curiosity is like, what does that look like though? Because I'm sure like embracing pain, what does that mean? Like if I got my heart broken, like how do I embrace it? Obviously, don't drink or don't do the avoidance strategies or binge on TV or food. Like what would I do instead then?
Yeah, so I'm gonna say one thing. By the way, drinking, avoiding things, watching TV, I don't vilify any of that because sometimes we need to just take some space to process. So I have to start there by saying it's a matter of what we do consistently. It's not the matter that we actually need to take the time to process and heal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one big thing I'm going to say is that no matter what, this philosophy doesn't work if we don't allow ourselves to feel. We must feel in order to heal, right? So when we talk about embracing pain, again, it's not about unnecessary amounts of pain. So I'll give, let me give an example really in the two first concepts, acknowledging the suffering we wish to avoid, like how does this actually start to come into fruition? And then how do I identify the right pain so that we know what we're doing? Okay. Because pain, by the way, also is mental, it's emotional, it's physical, it's spiritual, and it's also perceived. So I'm a big believer that our unhealed pain will keep us stuck, will keep us repeating the same patterns in our life. Whereas our healed pain can actually put us into a position to use our pain for purpose. So it's important to understand, like we have to allow ourselves to process and feel, which is why I have to say, I have to start there. But sometimes to even begin that process, we have to literally just chill for a minute. So sometimes we need to binge on Netflix or drink or whatever, right? Like I'm not vilifying any of that. It's about, are we doing that on a regular and consistent basis moving forward? So if we start with the idea of acknowledging the suffering we wish to avoid, right? Well, this becomes really important because I believe that most people think big, they plan, they set goals. But what typically happens in that scenario is they only set the positive side of it. I want to make X amount of money. I want to have this type of lifestyle. I want to travel this many times a year with my kids. I want to have this type of meaningful connection. Like we set out with the intent on what we do, and it's all on the positive side, which is great. But it doesn't totally move the needle completely because what we really need to do is how do we set ourselves in what are our bookends? Where do I want to go? What are the no limits goals that I'm going to set for myself to really challenge myself to reach, not protect myself in my thinking, but also what do I want to avoid in my life? Right? So I've got a client, he's 38 years old. Okay. And I have to start by saying that what keeps most people stuck is not a combination of strategy and tactics, right? That's what most people think. They're like, I'm stuck because I have the wrong strategy and tactics in my life. I'm sorry. I'm going to call bullshit on that. We don't need any more 7-step systems in our world. What we need is people to actually start to be able to move through these things and recognize that strategy and tactics only get us so far.
Right.
They're important. They're critical. We need to do them. But what keeps people stuck is our emotional triggers, our behavioral patterns, and our environmental conditioning. So if we start with this idea of acknowledging the suffering we wish to avoid, our 38-year-old client, he moved 26 times before the time he was 18.
Wow.
He lived with his dad, his mom, his aunt, his grandma. Okay. Never had the same set of friends twice, never went to the same school twice. Longest time he ever lived in one period was 2 years in that whole window. So that means every other year he moved multiple times a year, right? So he never learned how to give or receive love. He's got deep levels of shame, deep levels of self-worth, all these things, right? Fast forward to today, he's got a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful daughters. But he never learned how to give or receive love. And the man, husband, and father that he's become as a result of the patterns and the environmental conditioning in his world have not put him in a position to receive what he wants, nor have the connection with them he desires. Right? So he can sit here and understand that suffering to him is a world without them in it. And then when he flips it to the other side and he starts to understand what does that actually mean from a goal planning, he can create this vision of him and his wife sitting on their ranch in Texas when they're 80 years old with absolute silence. The only thing breaking the silence is the sound of the wind between the brush and the laughter of his daughters and his grandkids playing on their ranch. And when he can take that image and he can burn it into his soul, right, the purpose becomes big enough to overtake the pains required for him to become the husband, man, and father that he can be and that they deserve. We didn't take it to this idea of like, how do I identify the pains that we need to embrace and learn to embrace them? I'll use a personal example for me, right? My arm got ripped off. I don't have a lat on the left side. I don't have a tricep, my biceps, my gracilis from my leg. I have a curve in my spine because of the structural imbalance in my body, period, end of story. 15 years ago, I started getting what I thought was chronic pain, which was developing into suffering, and that my body was starting to get really stiff, actual back pain that was starting to manifest because of the imbalance. So I learned that if I stay active and I keep moving and I stay lean and I do all these things and I focus on core strength, that I can limit that from suffering to everyday manageable pain, like stuff that I can do. So what did I do? I went and I joined a gym because that's what everybody does when they decide they're going to get healthy. That's why New Year's resolutions, it's like gyms, their membership between January and March is awesome every year, right? So I did that. I went and I joined a gym and I went consistently for 30 days. And then I stopped going. Now, had I not gone to the process of understanding that I knew the suffering I wished to avoid, which is that I want to be physically active and mobile to be able to play with my grandkids when I'm older. I want to be able to have the mental acuity and physical ability and energy to be able to perpetuate this mission of impacting a billion lives. Had I not gone to that process of understanding suffering, what that would look like, which would be immobility, really, I probably would have stopped and been like, oh, I'm okay. But because I knew the suffering, I was able to push a little further and ask myself one more question. Is it the pain of going to the gym? Is it the pain of lifting weights? Is it the pain of plyometrics? Is it the pain of cardiovascular that I'm avoiding? Or is it the anxiety I get in a crowded gym? It was definitively the second. You see, it was an emotional trigger that was keeping me from performing at my best, and the environment wasn't set up for me to perform in the way that I needed to. So I had to embrace the pains required to set up the time, energy, money, and space in my house to build out my own home gym so that I could embrace the pains required daily to keep my body in movement so I could avoid the suffering holistically in my life. You see, it's not about just picking pains and saying, I got to go be in pain. It's about determining the ones that really are critical on our path to success. So you get dumped, process it, sit with it. What's the root of the feelings? Where is the pain coming from? Is it loss? Is it grief? Is it despair? Is it, oh, wow, I just had this great connection and I need to move on? Or is it because I was abandoned as a kid and I just really have a hard time not having commitment in my life? The pain that would be required in that moment is to sit with that moment just long enough to decide, do I need to go deeper and process beyond this because this is a pattern in my life where I continue to get dumped and I've got isolation, loneliness, and abandonment rooted in my shame? Or is it, oh, I got dumped, but this just wasn't the person for me. And so I can sit in these feelings for a moment, recognize it for what it is, and move on. Again, that's identifying the proper pains based on what the root need is, based on where you want to go.
So that whole process makes a lot of sense to me. I don't think it's something necessarily that people do very naturally or very commonly, right?
They don't.
Maybe
it's hard.
If they've had something going on and then they've had to dig deep and start figuring that out, then maybe some people have gotten those tools. But I kind of want to dig a little bit around how can someone start doing this sort of thing? Because I think the most common path I see is, okay, let's say it's a breakup. We'll stay on that example. And I get my heart broken. And instead of doing all the things you just said, we just go like, oh, I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to, what we were talking about before.
That's what the world tells us. Shove it down. Don't pay attention to it. Show up with a smile on your face.
All these tactics to get it out of our heads. So I'd be curious what you think is kind of an initial opening. Like what are some of the ways that we can start thinking about these things or start coming up with questions and whatnot? Because I know, once you have practice and experience, it gets a little bit easier to start digging through some of this stuff. Or if you get someone external, right, you go get a coach or someone who is involved in this stuff, you can rip right through it or at least make some progress. But yeah, I'd be curious what you think. Where's a good starting point?
Well, I think a starting point for anybody is just a simple question on, do you know the answer to the question, who are you? Right. I think so many people lose sight of that. And I think until you understand and calibrate to that, it's really difficult to think through what are the pains that require based on who I am, who am I doing this for, who am I trying to impact, and who am I becoming? Like if we start at the who, like that's one thing. But again, when I talk about strategy and tactics, that's because most people start with the what house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success, right? So at the end of the day, like we have to shift the focus from what to who. And so we have to put who before what. Not that they aren't both important, but I think most of the time our priorities are flip-flop. So that's an easy one, right? You go to a networking event. What's the first question anybody asks you other than your name? What do you do? And if you actually ask somebody who they are, 99% of people answer with what they do, because our identities are wrapped up in what we do. And it's no wonder then that we can't really feel like we're escaping the patterns in our lives when we don't actually chase what we want. We chase what the world has told us we should want. So that's one, is like, really, can you answer that question? Two, though, the supplementary part of that is like, we have to raise ourselves to a level of awareness to recognize, right, that we actually have more influence and control over our destinies than we give ourselves credit for. Most people feel like they're a victim, like life is fate, like they have no influence or control. And it's really a lack of awareness is what it comes down to. We have 11 million bits of information crossing through our minds every second, but we're only consciously aware of about 40. So what that says is that we're largely led by the unconscious. So until we go through a systematic process of moving the unconscious to the conscious, the unaware to the aware, we can't be intentional with it. Of course, it's going to feel like we're a victim or fate, like we have no influence or control over our destinies. So it starts with awareness first and foremost, and then a desire to want to be in a place that you're not currently at. Now, what I can almost guarantee you, because I work with a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of people, and I'm on a number of stages where we get an opportunity to be around a lot. And I don't say that to impress. I just say that my pure exposure to the number of people is massive. And what's fascinating is I think there's a very small percentage of people who are actually living the life they want to live. So at the end of the day, it's not that complicated. To your point, yeah, it forces people to go through this process if they've had something hit them. But the other question is what are you actually willing to commit to get where you really want to go? Mm-hmm. Nothing worthwhile in this life comes easy. And if you want to remain circling the drain, perpetually always wondering what I could be capable of instead of going out and trying to figure out what that looks like. How do I be a better husband? How do I be a better mother? How do I be a better father? How do I be a better wife? How do I be a better professional? Like at the end of the day, again, the first step to change is acceptance. You have to accept the current state of things before you're willing to do anything about it. Mm-hmm. If you're not unhappy where you are, then no problem. But I have found that there's a lot of people who feel stuck, who feel like they're going through the motions, who feel like they're living the life that they should be living versus the life they want to be living. And all of those patterns started when we were born, because when we're born, we're the brightest burning light we'll ever be. And then what happens is parents, teachers, coaches, employers start saying, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should be this, you shouldn't be that, you should chase that, you shouldn't chase that, you should make this amount of money, you shouldn't make that amount of money. And all we've done is we've started creating all these layers of shame on top of people, because should's a shame-based word, implies whatever you're doing isn't good enough. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden we're an empty vessel of who we once were. So when we chase the what, we lose the who. When we realign with the who and we can answer that question, the what's in our life become a manifestation of the who. And I realize I'm a little ethereal and esoteric in some of the examples I'm giving, but the reason is because it's not simple. And if I had a 7-step system to say, Donovan, you can do it this way, Alice, you can do it this way, great. But it's really more a framework and a philosophy, because it's starting to understand that, okay, if I want to embrace pain to avoid suffering, that means I've got to put in the work to understand where my emotional triggers are, how they've patterned in my life, and what are the conditions that have led that way, that are making sure that these things repeat themselves. So that if I can't ever seem to land the job that I want, if I can't ever seem to get the promotion I want, instead of asking why don't we start asking what, right? Not why did my job pass me up, or why did my boss pass me up for promotion, but what can I do differently next time to put myself in a position to actually be considered for that job? Mm-hmm. Again, that's how we start to shift from victim to ownership. And that's what this whole philosophy is about.
Yeah. I totally let me try to recap what I'm hearing. In summary is that, when everyone has like great ambitions, like going back to that gym example where memberships obviously increase in January, February, but the common trend is, they don't keep that consistent. They fall off the wagon, just like you described, and they're back in their old routines and their ruts. And I think what I'm hearing is like having a greater vision of like having a greater purpose to strive for, to make worth the pain and not the suffering, but just like the discomfort. There's going to be discomfort. There's going to be like something that's going to stop you and get you stuck and get in your way. But having like that greater vision will kind of keep you in line to push past that pain or move past it.
Yes, that is a part of it. It's a part of it.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting though. It starts with who are you?
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that vision often doesn't have to be some grandiose thing like you're going to go impact 1 billion lives. Like I realize mine is not something that everybody wants to do. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes people don't feel like they're living based on who they are. They're living the life that's been created or expected of or around them. And that's more often than not what keeps it there. So we need a vision, but we need clarity on who we are to even create that vision. It all starts with awareness on who are we.
Mm-hmm. So how would someone answer that question? Like I'm sitting there and I'm like, who am I? And I'm thinking like, am I giving myself adjectives of, oh, I'm kind, I'm compassionate, I'm someone who does want to make a difference in people's lives? Like, is this what they do? Like, are you following me?
Yeah, no, I'm following you completely. And I think that's exactly the point is we've lost sight of the who's in the world, right? Where we always focus on the what. People have an inability to answer the question, but it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
They can work the way that you just did. But if people don't know how to answer the question, just create 2 lists in your life.
Okay.
It's starting to be simple, right? Like what aligns, what calibrates. So on this one list, what are all the things, people, and sources of information that are funneling through you in your world that are additive to your world, that leave you energized, that leave you feeling like you could be in flow state and 8 hours would go by feeling like it was 1, that makes you feel appreciated, loved, right? Worthy. And in a position where you're like, man, I want to go do that again. The stuff that lights us up, the stuff that gets us energy and out of bed, right? That we all know what those things are and what they look like. That's a pretty good indication on who we are. But then we also have this other list, all the things, people, sources of information that funnel through our world, the things that leave us unworthy, the things that feel us leaving depleted, the things that we could spend 1 hour and it feels like 8, right? It's on the other side. Or we have an interaction with somebody and we just feel triggered and yucky. Like we don't feel good about ourselves. We all know what those are. The problem is that most people don't do anything to remove these from their world. And so they really get confused on who am I? All these positive things, we don't have enough sources. So if you just start incrementally removing things on this list and adding things to this list, or even just focusing more on the ones that are already there, that starts calibrating you more to who you are. Right? So who am I? I'm a husband and father first. I'm a family man that loves to spend time with the people that I love the most. I'm intellectually curious and I care deeply about people. I'm empathetic and compassionate. I'm also highly competitive in that I like to push myself to break beyond the limits that I've set for myself. I'm somebody that likes to interact with people and learn from anybody and everything I possibly can. And I'm somebody that always likes to chase to become a better version of myself, to develop a better world for others.
So let me take another angle. And I think it's saying the same thing, but to me, it sounds like very similar to sort of a set of values, right? Just like things that aspire to or care about the most. And under that sort of frame, I think it becomes, at least for me, because I've done this a lot in the past, but it becomes a lot easier when I have this list of values, or however you want to describe it, to compare that against, like you were saying, these two lists of activities and seeing which ones actually align and which ones don't. For me, that's been extremely helpful for being able to get really clear on which bucket these things fall into. Because sometimes in my past, I've had things that I thought, oh, I don't know, do I like this or do I hate it, or where does this fall? And then I map it against sort of these values and something that we've been talking about against sort of what are the long-term impacts, aka the suffering or lack thereof. And that's been sort of a framework that's worked really well.
No, that's exactly, that's exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, when you can determine who you are, the things that are important to you, who you're trying to impact, where you want to go and what you want to accomplish, it's that framework. And it's about building your life in alignment so that it becomes self-regulating. You know what fits and what doesn't. So to your point, right, when something new enters into your world and you challenge it up against your framework, that set of values, if you want to call it that, right, you know what fits and what doesn't. The problem is people often know what doesn't fit, yet they keep it there anyway. Right? They know that this relationship is unhealthy. They know that they work in a toxic shame-based culture at work. They know that they're triggered every time they work against that coworker. They know that every time they have to ask for the sale that it crushes them inside, yet they continue to do it even though it doesn't align with who they are. So your point is accurate. But what I'm talking about is embracing the pains required to actually make sure that those things that don't fit get removed from your life. Right? So the reality of it is, if I'm not a natural salesperson, it's not something that I'm aligned with. I'm more of a creative and a developer or a writer, right? But I'm in a sales role and I hate it every single day. Well, do I want to embrace the pains required to figure out what is my next path to actually start living more holistically to who I am as a creative and a writer? Or do I want to keep on this path because it's what I think I need to do to make X amount of money to fit the mold of what the world's created for me? Define it by your values, not the world's values. That's exactly the point. But most people don't run it through a framework. They're just like, oh, well, I'm here. This is what I'm going to do, right? It's instant gratification instead of saying, this isn't really what I want or who I want to be or who I want to become. So the question is if you have a framework, are you actually filtering things through it so it can actually work for you?
And what about if there's like limiting beliefs of like, yeah, I'd love to be a writer and creative, but obviously they might be thinking, well, that doesn't pay the bills and I gotta survive.
That's typically where emotional triggers come in.
Yeah.
Right. So if there's a limiting belief, it's typically tied to an emotional trigger or some pattern in your life. Right. So if I don't think that I have the framework or the ability to actually put myself out there to monetize my skill or who I am, right, I would also challenge, like, okay, where is the root? How do we become aware of our emotional triggers? What does that do for us? Right. I know I talk fast and I'm loud. I own it at this point in my life. But in the corporate world, right, when in B2B, how many meetings would I be in that I would get nudged like, shh, you can't talk like that? And my shame would be triggered and I'd shrink small and I'd start biting my tongue and I'd immediately feel unworthy to actually demonstrate what I need to convert and grow our business. Right. Or for example, right, I'm in a position where there are individuals, there's somebody that I've worked with for a while. She's 33 years old. She grew up in a family full of lawyers. They're all lawyers. They all want to be lawyers. They want everybody in their family to be lawyers because that's the path. She's a creative. For her entire life, she's been fighting against the narrative that what she chose as a career path is never going to be good enough or comparable to what her siblings did. Until she moves through that and accepts that for what it is and identifies wholly with who she is and knows that that's good enough, she's probably not going to embrace the pains required to walk away from things and do what she honors. So if you get stuck based on that, I'm a creative, I don't know how to do this, I don't have the ability to do it, right? Or I'm not worthy in the way that I view myself, then that means you've got work to do before you're ready to leave.
Yeah.
It's highly complex. And the reality of it is it's the hardest work that you will ever do. But if you walk through the internal journey, it's also the path to freedom. And nothing worthwhile in this world comes easy. In fact, I think all of the meaningful things actually are very painful. So I'm just trying to get us all to understand and redefine how do we view pain in our worlds, because it's these little moments of discomfort that when we lean into them and we stay consistent, we might have a chance of actually being who we are and showing the potential of who we are to the world.
I also, earlier you mentioned kind of honing in on or thinking about sort of the suffering that will show up if you don't do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a unique perspective that you don't hear about a whole lot, but I think one that just thinking for myself for a few minutes is one that produces quite a bit of motivation, right? If I think about going to the gym in terms of, oh, I'm going to get like ripped and just look chiseled and cut, like that provides some small amount of motivation. But if I think about going to the gym in terms of, I want to be able to walk, I want to make sure that I can get around, like go up a flight of stairs and not be completely winded. I want to make sure that I can, you know, if someone has to move that I care about, I can help them move instead of just stand on the sidelines. So I thought that's a really useful piece that doesn't get a whole lot of spotlight time. That when I think about it, again, just for a few minutes, it seems much more motivational, and it's the exact same thing. It's the exact same set of choices, but the motivation provided is
all it is.
stronger.
And so that's all I'm saying is give yourself the bookends, because people are motivated in different ways and in different moments as you're facing that hurdle to actually do what you need to do. Sometimes the carrot's going to motivate you. Sometimes the stick will. All I'm saying is give yourself the option to have both so that you're motivated in every moment possible. I agree with you though. I'm one of those that the suffering motivates me more, right? Like getting to a certain goal, as meaningful that is to me, like I would much rather avoid the things that I know I want to avoid and create suffering in my world than I would to even, I mean, it's even more motivating to avoid suffering for me than it is to even chase joy. Because if I avoid suffering, I give myself a chance to have joy be natural. It's not that much effort anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At a certain level, it seems like too, it's not just suffering, it's sort of loss, right? It's loss in terms of there is a certain quality of life that I have at the moment. And if I keep making certain types of choices, I start losing some of that quality of life.
That's right.
And that's the part that really starts up that fires, where it's like, oh wait, hold on, wait, 100%. There's stuff that I can do and I don't want to lose that. Whereas again, like gaining more things, and maybe this is just a luck of the position that I'm in, where I can mostly do the things I want and I mostly feel okay most of the time. But thinking about losing some of that is just terrifying.
Yeah, you're articulating it very well. And those are the motivations of understanding suffering.
Mm-hmm. I kind of want to circle back to your story, because I'm sure you getting to where you are now is quite the journey, and quite the journey. And, you know, to just have such a traumatic experience when you were a child, and, you know, obviously children haven't quite developed what you've developed now. Like, where was that starting point? Like, were you angry? Were you kind of like in the victim mode of like, why me kind of a thing? Like what so happened?
The initial reaction was absolutely that, why me?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
At 7 years old, even I remember thinking that didn't sit with me very long. This whole idea of not getting stuck by what's happened to me, but getting moved by what to do with it, came really in those first 2 weeks in ICU, because I was feeling sorry for myself.
Yeah.
I was feeling stuck, and we were being overwhelmed with people in the ICU, other families coming up to us and saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. What can we do to help? And then come to find out that their kid's laying in the ICU across the hall from me with a terminal illness and doesn't know if they're going to live another 30 days. Mm-hmm. So for me, other than the initial threat to my life, and at that moment, not knowing whether or not my arm would be one, reattached, or two, if I'd have functional, practical use of it like I do today, right? I wasn't really in jeopardy of losing my life. So perspective pointed me at what was important there. But then what happened, truthfully, is that I was immediately put on the other side of a lens that people would put over my situation about what they would be capable of in my situation. Right? They would view me and immediately put me into a victim position because they couldn't imagine being there themselves. And at 7 and 8 years old, when I'm in a sling and I have adults asking me what happened to my arm, and I tell them I was run over by a truck and my arm got ripped off.
Yeah.
I also never was believed on my own story. they would look to my parents for validation, because that sounds too crazy for a 7-year-old to be saying it. Like, really? You got run over by a truck and your arm got ripped off?
Mm-hmm.
And so I created an external narrative for myself, frankly, which was I'm good, I'm strong, I'm capable, and I don't need anybody's help. And it served me really well for a long time until it didn't. Right. And so that next period of my life was at 20 years old. I had a snowboarding accident, compound fracture of my left arm, almost lost it again. Went 10 months with it hanging by my side and 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me because of the medical malpractice, because of the complications of my history. Okay. I relived a whole lot of those experiences, but I realized in that moment the power of our narratives because nobody was there. And it wasn't that I didn't have people who loved me. It wasn't that I didn't have friends. It's that they bought into my narrative. Brian's good. He's strong. He's capable. He doesn't need our help. And then the time that I was most vulnerable and didn't have my parents to help me this time, I didn't have the courage to ask for help. So I focused that whole next period of my life on human connection, around the concepts of vulnerability and authenticity, and really mastered those. Did a great job of using the emotional intelligence I'd conditioned earlier to redirect attention from me to then bring it to a place of like, how do I get people to bring their walls down? And was really effective with that so that I could connect with people on a deeper level. But what I realized in my early 30s through another health issue is that my wife had for 14 years told me that I didn't feel anything. I was like, what do you mean I don't feel anything? Because every time I'd feel something, it'd be chaos inside. It's just that it didn't express externally, and the empathy wasn't expressed. So she always told me I was sympathetic, not empathetic. And that used to be, something I dealt with. And reality of it is I when I shut off physical pain, I shut off emotional pain, which meant I shut off emotions. So when the demands of our environment exceed our capacity to cope, we start to shut things off. I didn't do it intentionally on either one. But what I also realized is human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. And it changed the dynamic and environment for everything I did from that moment forward. And it was that the beginning of the path where I had to unpack my shame. I had to unpack my worth. I had to unpack the anger that I was still dealing with, which, by the way, has only happened in the last year. The anger was buried so deep it could barely be excavated. And 98% of people in my life were like, you're not an angry person. You've never had any anger or edge, right? But it definitely created damage in my world because I was unaware of it. And so, yes, when I talk from this place, it's not like I just got my arm ripped off and came up with all these philosophies. I've literally been through the depths of pain. I'm a practitioner of pain, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and perceived. Because I also even know what it's like to have phantom pain. So I understand the difference between real and fake pain. So when I talk about these things, it's because I've literally been down this path to unpack each one of these things, actually put in the work, become aware of where these things are, own them, unroot them, and move through them so that they no longer keep me stuck, but I can use them as an advantage. And I know what it's like to be stuck and miserable and lost in who I am, despite having everything on the external world. I know what it's like. Nobody deserves to feel that, and a lot of people do. And I know what it's like to feel joy, freedom, and fulfillment holistically in my life and align 100% with who I am, which is where I'm at right now. And everybody deserves to feel this. So you commented on my passion earlier. I'm very passionate because everybody on the planet deserves to feel this right now. This is what freedom looks like. This is what it looks like to live all into who we are and use our trauma, our pain, our past, our lessons to help guide our future and the impact we can have on other people.
I love it. You are such an inspiration, and I know you are going to be impacting so many people and get to that billion for sure.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. Brian, well, it's been such a pleasure to have you on our show. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we wrap up today?
You know what? I typically don't come into these places to plug anything. We obviously are always selling stuff. I've got 4 different businesses that have different things. So we could pitch a bunch, but that's not what I believe in doing right here. Like when I come onto these shows, it's about relationships, values, and impact. And so all I'm going to ask is that people, if they found anything that resonated with them today, maybe do some more research on who we are. You can find me at Bogert Brian on any social. You can go to our website at brianbogert.com. Here will be my request. I won't get to a billion alone. It's going to happen only through collective impact. And so if you actually go and look at anything, you'll see that we create a lot of free content that doesn't have pitches and asks and funnels attached to it, right? We run a business, so obviously we understand all those things, but most of what we put out is truly there just to elevate and empower the people around us. So my ask would be, if you liked this, go check us out. If you see anything that actually resonates with you, don't just, not that you like, but like moves you, please like, comment, and share, because that's not a vanity metric. It's a matter of helping the algorithms work in our favor so as many eyeballs and ears can consume what we're trying to put into the world as possible. So again, only if it really resonates with you, because moved people, and it's going to be through the ripple effect and the momentum from everybody who are actually collectively trying to create this impact that'll be the only shot we get there.
Absolutely. I love it. Yes. Well, thank you again, Brian, so much for coming on our show. We've really enjoyed it.
Thank you for building a platform for us to put good into the world. And it was a good conversation. Looking forward to talking more.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.